So far for the data persistence, we have seen three methods: volume mounts, bind mounts, data containers. So one more thing that's left is sharing data over NFS. Sharing data over NFS. So in a large company, it's highly likely that there are NFS shared directories already in use. NFS is a well-proven option for serving files out of a central location. For Docker to get traction, it's usually fairly important to be able to get access to these shared files. Docker doesn't support NFS out of the box and installing an NFS client on every container, so you can mount the remote folders. So remote folders isn't considered a best practice. So instead that the suggested approach is to have one container acts as a translator from NFS to a more Docker friendly concept, volumes. Here for us the problem statement is to we want a seamless access to a remote file system over NFS. So the solution: use an infrastructure data container to broker this access. So let's look into that. This is our Docker host machine. Inside that we have hosted and spun a Docker application container 1 and Docker application container 2 and a Docker NFS client container, and so total we have hosted 4 containers. Okay, so Docker application container 1, 2, 3 and a Docker NFS client container. We'll see how this works. Done. Now this is now it's time to bind mount the two containers. How do you bind mount? The NFS server exposes the internal directory as the /export folder, which is bind mounted on the host. Okay, let me show that. This is our NFS server. This is our NFS server. This is our Docker server or Docker host. And here, this NFS server has a lot of directories inside that, out of which /export folder or export directory, which should be bind mounted with the Docker client. How do you do that? It's pretty simple. It's a normal bind mount, but here you have to mention the server information also. You mention the server information and then that directory, and that should be bind mounted with the /MNT directory of the Docker NFS client container, whereas all other containers will be connected with the Docker NFS client container. You see that? Yes, that's how it's bind mounted. So infrastructure container mounts the NFS mounted /mounted directory as a volume. Now the Docker host then mounts the folder using the NFS protocol to its /MNT directory. Then a so-called infrastructure container is created which binds the mount folder. So an infrastructure container will be created in the end that mounts the that binds the mount folder. So imagine that you want to share the contents of your hosts, that is here hosts forward slash opt test db folder which contains the my big database.db. My big db is one database. That database you want to share. So as a root, install the NFS server and create an export directory with open permissions. That's it. You install apt get install NFS kernel server, then make their forward slash export, then give the permissions chmod 777, that is owner, group, and others. All are 777. All permissions give to that export directory. Then once that is done, now bind mounts the db directory to your export directory using this. Bind mount your db directory with export directory. Then now you should be able to see the contents of the opt test db directory in export, the forward slash export directory. So here you can see that example. So you need to require the IP of that server also, NFS server. So that will also be included while you are doing while you are giving these commissions. This is how a sharing data over NFS works, but we'll look into more. So here for safety we are mounting read only here, but you can't mount a read write by replacing, but you can also mount read write by replacing RO with RW. So it's just an example. Here you can go through it. You see that how do you mount an NFS server. Okay, so for that the command that we're going to use is mount option T, that's for tag and NFS. You're tagging it. Then after that you can see that here 127.0.0.1, this is the directory, the IP of the host machine of the NFS, that's NFS server, and then that has been mapped with forward slash export or MNT. Then export FS option A, then finally you start the service, that NFS kernel service, you start that. Then once that is done, you're ready to run your infrastructure container. Then the one another infrastructure container will be spun. For that you have to say docker run option T is again that, and is interactive, and name tag, you are giving the name to the container. Okay. So then your container will be spinning. So then after that you can use naming convention for operational efficiency and all those things you can do. So the pattern of a shared resource mounted with privileged access centrally for user used by others in multiple containers is a powerful one that can be that can make development workflows much simpler. So not a substitute for security. Remember that this technique only provides a security through obscurity. As you will see later in our Docker sessions, as we move across our Docker module, we'll see more. So let's see whether we have done all four. Yes. So for data persistence, volume mounts, bind mounts, data containers, and final one is NFS. So all done.